Make sure you rinse your project quickly enough that the water absorbs into the bisqueware quickly. That way it's not too wet to absorb the glaze later. Next, mix up the glaze that you've picked out. If you take a few minutes picking one after you've rinsed it, that will allow the project to dry a little bit further, which is good. If you're having trouble avoiding splashing, use a splash guard. They are typically found under the counter in the Cone 10 area. Mix it up thoroughly so that there is no sediment on the bottom. You can scrape the drill across the bottom and check to see if there's any globs there. Dipping with tongs allows you to not worry about fingerprint marks on there. You dunk the whole thing in, and then as you dump out the liquid, watch, and you want to control where the glaze is dripping because it will go thicker in areas if it runs over that as it's pouring out. So be aware of that. Then carefully lift the tongs away without scraping up the side, rinse them off, and please put them away. Next, you will wipe off the bottom after it's dry enough to touch. You're going to get a wet sponge, and if you've designed your foot properly, you'll be able to easily wipe across the bottom and get the glaze off of everywhere you want it to be removed from, and not wipe it off of anywhere where you want to keep it. If you do have little marks, fingerprint marks down at the bottom near where you're wiping off, it's usually best to touch those up before you wipe it off. Make sure you've wiped off both the bottom right there and the bevel right there. The glaze catch can have glaze. Double check for any places where the glaze is thicker. If you see places where it dripped down that you want to remove, you can gently scrape at the thick areas with the side of your needle tool or your hook tool or something similar. Be careful to not put the powder into the air. Do it over a trash can when possible. Once you've rubbed that smooth, if it doesn't look thicker in that area, then it should glaze evenly. Next, I'm going to show you how you would glaze the inside separately and how you can layer on the glazes. Once the glaze that goes underneath has dried, you can go ahead and put the glaze right over the top, and it shouldn't contaminate the two glazes. If you ladle some on the inside and then you pour it around slowly so that it gets everywhere, and as you dump it, try and roll it so that it gets as much of the rim as possible. You'll want to hold it upside down longer than I have here if you're trying to keep it only on the inside. You can see a couple of drips. I'm glazing the top in the same iron red, so I'm not worried about it as long as those drips don't go down too far. Then as I dip the top, I want to avoid an almost straight line. So I dip at an angle, and then I will try and make some kind of natural drips or control how the glaze is going to drip down. I can do some of that by shaking it, as you just saw, and I will do the rest by faking it. I'm going to use a paintbrush, and I'm going to dab with the paintbrush to create lines as if it were naturally dripping down in kind of a wavy, dribbly pattern. When you use a paintbrush, you don't want to brush very much. It's mostly dabbing. If you brush, the brush strokes can scrape off just as much glaze as they're applying. So I'm using a soft bristled paintbrush and mostly dabbing and then kind of sliding that around a little bit. Where the glaze is puddled up thick as it's wet, it will be absorbing into the water will be absorbing into the bisqueware, making it stay thicker. So you can kind of see that I'm rotating that and adding, and I'm trying to make that look as natural as possible. I didn't like how it was only on that one part of the handle. So here I'm taking that big drip, and I'm kind of starting from the bottom and working my way up and making sure that those glaze drips look natural. Then please clean up after yourself. wipe down the tops of the buckets, anything that you may have made a mess doing. The splash guard goes right there in the cabinet. Wipe up the counter, and then if you've made any spills on the ground, then you should wipe those up as well. Put away any ladles you've used, tongs, clean off the sponges, and you can see that mess I made on the ground right there. Wipe it up with the sponge, and then go back over it with a paper towel so that it doesn't get tracked all over the room and the school. So do your best to clean up after yourself. This glaze area is part of the daily cleanup, but it gets ignored because not very many people used it, and you all get in the habit of cleaning up everything except for this.